Well, I'm awake. I really enjoy coming to our services here in this sanctuary. I love the community. I love meeting with friends and acquaintances. The music is magnificent. The sermons are inspiring and thought-provoking. What I really enjoy most is having the time to turn off my day-to-day focus on my to-do list and let my mind be channeled into floating freely into seldom trod paths of whimsy and speculation. I go home from these services refreshed and ready to apply myself to the tasks at hand. I hope that we all give ourselves permission to let our mind and spirit soar and become the best that we can be. We light the chalice with words by Eleanor Westbrook. In a world ravaged by violence, by hatred, by conflicts that seem eternal and insoluble, sometimes the only thing we can do is be still for a moment. To remind ourselves what is real, the sun that rose this morning, the dirt under our feet, the air whispering in and out of our lungs. This hour, try just to be present in each moment as it unfolds. Your simple attention is what makes these moments holy. The first reading is Undivided Attention by Taylor Mali. A grand piano wrapped in quilted pads by movers, tied up with canvas straps, like classical music's birthday gift, is gently nudged without its legs out an 8th floor window on 62nd Street. It dangles in the April air from the neck of the mover's crane, Chopin's shiny black squares and dirty white crisscross patterns hanging like the second to last note of a concerto, played on the edge of the seat, the edge of tears, the edge of 8 stories up going over. It's a piano being pushed out of a window and lowered down onto a flatbed truck. And I'm trying to teach math in the building across the street. Who can't teach when there are such lessons to be learned? All the greatest common factors are delivered by the long-necked cranes and flatbed trucks, or come through everything, even air, like snow. See, snow falls for the first time every year, and every year my students rush to the window as if snow were more interesting than math, which of course it is. So please, let me teach like a Steinway, spinning slowly in April air, so almost falling, so hinderingly dangling from the neck of the mover's crane, so on the edge of losing everything. Let me teach like the first snow falling. The second reading is an excerpt from the essay In Search of Distraction by Matthew Bevis. We are used to hearing that attention is good for us, and that bad things happen when we are inattentive. People have been in training for attention for some time. Attend upon the Lord without distraction, Paul advised in Corinthians. Darwin would later stress the importance of attendance as less spiritual and altogether more adaptive. Hardly any faculty is more important for the intellectual progress of man than the power of attention, he observed in The Descent of Man. This watchfulness is certainly useful, but it may need to be watched. Darwin adds that wild animals sometimes become so absorbed when thus engaged that they may be easily approached. So perhaps it's hazardous for me to pay too much attention. As an easily approached attender, I may myself become prey. And there still appears to be some confusion about what kind of attention is the right kind. Computer games have often been seen as lamentable distractions, and as contributing factors to poor attention levels. But that was before researchers began lauding the superior attentional capacity of those who played them. These complications notwithstanding, distraction has tended to get bad press. Distraction is a time between times, a time in which we become momentarily subject to the non-thought inside the thought. And this is the time, or one of the times, of poetry. Attention can be helpful later on as part of the process of revision, but for vision itself, poets are in need of distraction. Indeed, to attend is to stretch to, from the Latin ad plus tendere, to stretch. So attention itself should be conceived not so much as fixity, but as a kind of motion, more like a searchlight than a spotlight, as though intense absorption were always searching for ways in which it might convert itself into distraction. As a poet becomes distractedly absorbed by a bright star, the star itself is already luring him into a feeling for something other than itself, igniting a sense of the infinite. I'm writing this sentence as a distraction from a book about poetry that I'm meant to be writing, but also with a hunch that the book may get written via the distraction that something in the book needs to get worked out or worked through by my not attending to it. Or perhaps the book was really always a distraction, and wherever the non-book resides is the place I'm supposed to be. That's a dream or daydream of the tangential, as a route to the heedlessly thoughtful, which is a dream I want to have. The numinous turns nebulous. The unfocused seems to include or to inspire a new sense of freedom. Whatever this freedom is, I would like a little of it, more than a little.
Just sleep on it. It's a phrase I learned recently that is echoed through many different traditions and cultures all around the world. Sleep on it, as a piece of wise counsel to say, slow down, take it easy. Not only is the phrase used to convey some time to cool down, to de-escalate your own potentially catastrophic email or tweet or verbal jab that you clearly and cleverly came up with to destroy some other person's well-being and emotional health. These are good things to sleep on and pause on. The phrase can also relate, of course, to pausing and reflecting on some hard news you receive or some challenging problem. Neuroscience has focused on this research for some time, and recently, maybe you heard this too, a report highlighting the rejuvenation, the almost magic that sleep can have on the brain. Almost a mental reset where when you're in REM or deep sleep, the brain begins to process all the new information that's been swirling around, creating new neural pathways and synapse connections. In fact, it creates what some researchers call a new web of awareness. While you're sleeping, you deepen your memory, you integrate your learning, you piece together while you sleep things that you couldn't while you were awake. Often, maybe you've experienced this, that you are able to awake with either a less stressful or agitated response to something, or sometimes you can solve a problem all of a sudden in the morning that the night before you could not. In many ways, this goes against what our culture has always thought about focus, like our monthly theme of attention. You know these scenes in movies, right? Pulling all-nighters for some school or work project, getting a team together to deeply focus, laser focus in on some problem, some deadline, some task, and pay such deep attention to it, surrounded by half-eaten pizza and crumpled papers, and at some point you realize you have hit a roadblock, also known as mental deprivation, and you give up. Or maybe you come up with some horrible idea, or maybe you just squeak by. Religion is cast in this way too sometimes. Pray without ceasing, says the old scripture. Images of devotion are assumed as constant vigilance, paying attention. Even some of the most beautiful religious teachings have at their core this phrase, don't fall asleep, stay awake. Of course, not literally, but there is much reality in human nature that there is a caution not to miss out. You don't want to miss out on truth or beauty or survival in this life, in Darwin's words. You must stay awake, pay attention fervently, don't lose focus, or something bad might happen. But too much intensity of focus, turns out, is not good for us. Actually, distraction might be really good for us. As Mark read to us, it gets a lot of bad press, but that's been changing as we learn more about humanity, learn more about our minds. In one study, it suggests the benefit, especially in the process of aging, of being distracted to help people adapt to new life circumstances, or to process new information, or problem solve in creative ways. So if you're not paying attention to anything I'm saying right now, good for you. That's a spiritual practice now. I will say it lessens my concern preparing a sermon, knowing that every 4 seconds or so people are going in and out of attention. It's good. Evolutionarily, as Bevis wrote, sometimes a primary focus becomes a hindrance to our well-being. It becomes a threat if we don't notice whatever is beyond the immediate, right? To survive, we have always needed to pay attention beyond the immediate. Daphne LaPrince Ringuet wrote an article in Wired last year about a study from Princeton and UC Berkeley focusing on focus. She writes, researchers have found that rather than being laser-like, attention is actually more akin to a spotlight that continually dims and comes back again. They conclude our ability to focus is designed to work in bursts of attention rather than uninterruptedly. The reality is we're zooming in and out of attention up to 4 times per second, I say. 4 times per second. She continues, between those bursts of attention, we're actually distracted. And during those periods of distraction, the brain pauses. It scans the environment to see if something outside the primary focus of attention might be important. And if there is not, it refocuses on whatever you are doing. The brain tricks us, she writes, into perceiving reality as some continuous movie, but our perceptions go through rhythmic change. I was really struck by that phrase from the article. The brain scans the environment to see if there is something outside that primary focus of attention that might just be important. It seems like one of the simplest, most basic truths in life. When we hear that, we think, yeah, of course, that's correct. We do that all the time. And at the same time, I think sometimes it's one of the hardest things to do. All of religion, all of philosophy, biology, physics, art, poetry, ethics, morality, everything of meaning in this world has for eternity been wrestling with some part of this truth for millennia. How do I pay attention to something beyond myself? Or maybe better, how do I distract myself from my own ego or my own primary focus of attention? How do I live with a posture of humility toward this beautiful and broken world to realize that there might just be something important, worth my time, meaningful outside of whatever I'm focused on? Just beyond the place where I'm comfortable, just beyond the boundaries I've created where I was pretty certain I had everything I needed to know right here. We wrestle with that all the time. Moving beyond primary focus, distracting ourselves from ourselves, to the hard and sometimes uncomfortable belief that there is always more in this world, more love, more peace, more truth, more wisdom, more stories, more to learn, more to grow, more to wrestle with, more of what we don't know yet and maybe never will. I wonder if you can think of a time, I'm sure you can, when someone or something, some moment or person or experience distracted you from what you thought you were sure about, shook your foundations of what you were sure must be true, broadened your awareness of this world. Because sometimes we can get so stuck in our own stories. And yes, our own stories can be beautiful, and it's important to claim them as our own. But often we can get stuck there and forget about the wide world of stories and identities and practices and hopes and dreams. Part of our tradition is the idea, the belief that Scripture is not bound to one set of stories. That what we consider Scripture is an open canon, an open source wisdom literature. That wisdom speaks through ancient writings and modern poetry, through lived experience and storytelling and modern science spanning century and culture. Part of our spiritual practice, then, is to notice and pay attention to not only the sacredness of our own story, but to attend to the stories of others as a living, sacred text. Like anything, we believe that no scripture or story is inerrant, perfect, universal, but all stories have the potential to reveal something sacred, something of meaning and purpose and beauty. If you break open the word distract, it means to leave the tract, to leave the set path, to move beyond that which is assumed, or in other words, to know that the well-worn path may not be the best or only way. There can be a tendency in our liberal approach to pluralism, in the belief that wisdom comes from many sources, in what cultural anthropologists or ethicists call minimization, the idea or practice of minimizing or boiling down everything to some universal truth. It's an epidemic in my generation. I grew up with this belief. In an attempt to move beyond discrimination or prejudice or judgment, we moved a little too far into the perspective of sameness or colorblindness, as it's referred to about race, a feel-good, mainline, liberal cultural perspective that really at our core we're all the same. We can all just get along. It's not completely untrue. In many ways, yes, of course, people from many cultures and traditions, various practices and beliefs share a common humanity, hopes and dreams for health and well-being and belonging and home. And yet, if we are truly to attend to one another, whoever that is, and attend to the stories of others as a sacred text, then we must know and attend to the beauty of difference, of particularities, to know and celebrate our diversity and our uniqueness, and to love that about humanity. To distract from our own assumptions or comfort or norms and pay attention to the stories of others. Painful stories and histories of oppression, beautiful stories and histories of liberation, to all the simple, everyday stories that thread our lives together. To know that there is always something more, something deeper to help us grow. At a gathering last week, there was a small group that spoke about attention and distraction. And one person said, "Sometimes my mind can't focus on just one thing, but can focus on many things at once. Like as I'm speaking, I'm noticing the lyrics in the music in the other room, or I can hear parts of the conversations at tables across this room, or as I'm talking, I'm thinking about the wooden table right in front of us, wondering who made it, what was their life like, wondering where the wood came from, wondering where the tree or trees that made it were rooted, what forest, what air, how many years, how many lives has this table already lived through to come here and hold our drinks." I love that reflection because it reminds me, if attention means to stretch our awareness, and distraction is to move outside the well-worn grooves of mind and heart, then these are just two sides of the same coin. And then the question is, noticing the deeper story of the table distraction, or is it paying attention? Well, like any good spiritual question throughout history, the answer is yes, both. Because it is true that throughout time and across the world, throughout our life and threading through each day is an invitation to go deeper, to keep the soul wrestling with what is true. Because the snow falls, writes the poet, for the first time every year, and every year my students rush to the window. You, as you're comfortable, to join a hand next to you or place your hand over your heart and breathe deep the breath of life. Go yonder, and gather the people. Give them not hell, but courage and hope. Give them something of the love you have found here. Tell all the people that love is our home. Amen.